Can you briefly introduce yourself and your role in short drama industry?
Sure. My name's Anthony Darvall. Hi, everyone. I'm an actor. I've been acting for a very, very long time, and I started in short dramas in the middle of 2023. It was about June 2023. It was the second short drama that was shot in Australia. I was lucky enough to have a role in that. And since then, sporadic roles here and there until 2025. And 2025 was a much bigger year for me. I'm not exactly sure how many, but a large number of short dramas, including the opportunity to go to China twice, which I was very grateful for and got to work with some very cool teams over there. And here we are at the beginning of 2026. I'm excited to where it leads me.
How did you first enter short drama industry as an actor?
So we have a website in Australia called Star Now. I don't know whether that's prominent where you're based in China, but it's fairly prominent in some Western countries. Anyway, they listed the audition opportunity for the various roles on Star Now. I'm pretty sure it was Star Now. And I applied, I auditioned, I got the role, and then I was on set. So it was all very straightforward. I auditioned for the first one as well. I wasn't lucky enough to get that one, but you win some, you lose some.
Before doing this microdrama performance, have you performed in other TV series or advertisement or other forms of media?
Yeah, so I'm a pretty well-rounded actor. I've done theater, film, voiceover, short films, TV series, sort of anything and everything you can imagine. I've tried it. Stunts, green screen, the whole lot. I was able to understand the requirements of what the short drama needed before being on set, despite it being a very new medium for Australia at the time. I don't know what the time scale is like in terms of how these were being shot, but it was very early on that I was involved with them in 2023 in Australia. But were they shooting a lot before, say, June 2023 in China?
It exploded in 2022 in China.
Really? That's interesting.
We translated into English and shooting some we call overseas short dramas. I think start in
Mm.
late 2022, probably in early 2023. So it was still very early. You just mentioned you performed in theater or in TV series before. So is any something similar and different in performing in those media?
Nobody really asked about the similarities. That's interesting. I'll give you the differences first. So it was interesting for me, just a little bit of context. In the beginning of 2025, sorry, I shot two short dramas almost back to back, and then I started a lead role for a feature film that I was shooting most of last year. And it was different going from the short drama sets to the feature film set because some days on the feature film set we would spend a whole day on one scene, whereas a short drama that's rarely possible unless the scene's pages long or 15 pages long or something like that. And even then, that's still a significant chunk of the script. So you have a lot more time and breathing room and time for experimentation in film and sort of even time to just sit there and contemplate things and go, oh, what if we tried this? What if we experimented here? Especially in the first week, we had a whole block where we were just in one location for this feature film. Versus short dramas, obviously, you're racing the clock, the budgets are tight. The constraints are quite massive, but you can still come up with some pretty wonderful things despite the limitations that the tight schedules create. In terms of similarities, you're still on set, you're still working with actors, everybody's still looking at their script, figuring out their lines, trying to wonder how they want to play the scene. You go to makeup and hair and costume, and then you jump on set and you block out the scene. It's just the speed is the factor. I guess the collaborative nature is there as well, which is nice most of the time. Obviously, not everything's perfect, but that sense of being part of a team that's working towards a greater vision is still there.
If I ask you to describe short drum performing, it's more close to theater performing or TV advertisement performing, commercials performing, or feature film performing.
I mean, you're still on camera, so I think it's closer to film work. However, with certain scenes, certain characters, certain storylines, there is a bit of a sense of melodrama, and you're encouraged to play the scenes bigger and pace the scenes up. Not all the time. And sometimes, if you're in a scene, if we're in a scene together and we're saying the lines and there's not a sort of, we're taking our time with our lines, we're letting the discussion between us breathe. Most of the time in short dramas, they'll edit most of that out, most of those breaths, those pauses, just because of the nature of how it goes. So mostly similar to film acting, but there can be times when you're asked to play it bigger, play it faster, which is a little bit more reminiscent of theater.
A lot of people criticize it's a little bit overacting. Like when you
Mm.
perform in stage, right? It's a little bit overacting because audience are have a distance from the stage.
I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but for me, truth is truth. It doesn't matter what the medium is. If you find the sort of truth of your character's experience in the moments that you're playing, you just try and play that and adjust to the medium. So for me, I don't really make that big of a distinction between acting. It's between acting in different formats. It's more so technical. The audience is there, and you've got to make sure that you're being heard in the back of the auditorium because those people still paid for their tickets. Versus when you're on film, you've got a mic. You don't have to project. You still have to make sure that you're heard and understood because there's this tendency with actors nowadays. There's a lot of mumbling that happens in film. And so lots of people put their subtitles on, even if they speak the same language. But I think about actors like Peter O'Toole or Anthony Hopkins, you've got to make sure that you're understood. Anyway, that's sort of my personal take on it.
Some people say short drama characters often seen as quite flat. As actors still need to build a strong sense of belief or authenticity within the role. So how do you prepare? Can you give me a specific example?
I've been lucky enough that I've had some well-written characters. And then I've had some other characters where their motivations aren't immediately apparent in terms of the script, and you have to really do a lot of mental gymnastics in order to understand what's happening in terms of the scene and why your character is acting the way he's acting. I did a short drama called My Husband is an American Hero. And I played a secondary antagonist in that. And he comes in sort of halfway through the story and is quite abusive to the lead character, sides with the family that is abusing her at her husband's funeral. Typical vertical stuff that the family doesn't believe the lead female in terms of her saying that she's the widow, and she's constantly trying to prove herself and the family's disproving her. And for me, coming in and understanding my position in terms of things off screen, being related in terms of workplace to the general and the army, and understanding, oh, I have to figure out why my character would behave the way that he's doing when there are on the surface logical things that would make me want to act in a different way. There's a lot of sort of thought and investigative circling of the scenes that you go into to just make it make sense. Because at least I don't ever just want to get on set and just say the lines because they're just written. I want to be able to play it and play it well.
Totally agree. So when you have this role, the script, right? Have you talked with the director or maybe to the writer?
Sometimes I mention it, but for that specific example, it wasn't so much that I needed verbal confirmation from the writer and the director in terms of what it was. I just needed it to make sense in my head so that I could go on to set and say the lines as it was written and have a convincing reason for myself for doing the things that I was doing, which on the surface were very horrible. And so it's hard to justify it. But if I have that reason in my head of why it's justifiable, then anything goes, really.
So you basically have your own character description, the whole background story of the character you perform.
And sometimes it's easier than others. I mentioned Cinderella's Royal Secret to you, which was a absolute joy for me to work on. That character was very well written and very likable, funny, and charming, and had a lot of great moments. And his character arc made sense. You knew what he wanted, and he was consistent in terms of what he wanted, despite learning things as the script goes on and changing what he was going for. Anyway, so sometimes it's easier than others.
That one, Cinderella's Royal Secret, is it shoots in Australia?
No, it was shot in Shanghai. It was wonderful. Everyone was supportive, the cast, the crew. It was a great experience. There's definitely some cultural nuances that you have to sort of come to grips with. But I've traveled a lot with my family, myself as an adult, and so I like getting to go to new places and explore new cultures and meet with other interesting people. Being on set and getting to do the thing that I love in another country, adding the cultural differences on top of that, that was really cool for me.
Actually, I figured out when I first watched Cinderella's Royal Secret, I know it was a Chinese story. The director of this short drama is Chinese.
Yep. The whole I'm trying to think. The whole crew was Chinese, and there were only maybe a couple of the crew members, maybe one or two that spoke English. I think it was the liaison and the producers. We got on and we worked together, and we created something that I'm personally quite proud of. That one. It can be tough being in another country, spending very long hours, especially for the lead actors. They had very long hours on that one. But it turned out well, and I loved working with the cast and working with the crew. All's well that ends well, I guess.
We're filming in a filming base, right? Cinderella's Royal Secret.
We were sort of all over. There was a lot of different locations.
You also shoot in China twice. The other
Mm.
time is in Xi'an as well, or in other cities.
The other time was in Qingdao. That was very brief, though. I think in terms of interesting experiences, the other one that I had was my first one of 2025, and that was in Australia. So it was a completely different experience again. Everyone on the crew speaks English. I know everyone in the crew on that one spoke English, and that was a bit more heightened because it was a vampire one. I had contact lenses in the whole time. There's a lot in this industry that I'm really grateful for. Lots of different experiences that I wouldn't get to have had otherwise. Being in race cars, getting to play a vampire, working with people from all sorts of different cultures. It's been really wonderful.
I thought mostly a modern ones shoot in China because we got this filming basis, a lot of villas, interior design, so it's easier to shoot.
I think you're right. From what I've seen, it's usually a lot of modern ones, and I think this was quite an anomaly, this one.
How many short dramas are filming in Australia every day or every month, let's say?
I know that it's pretty much only Sydney and Melbourne are the only ones that shoot. It's not that many. The Australian entertainment industry in of itself is very small. So the vertical drama industry kind of reflects that as well. It's very small and very tight knit. It could be that there aren't any short dramas shooting for a couple of weeks and then maybe three or four, but there's rarely many that are shooting, maybe one or two shooting usually at a time.
How is the in Australia's short drama industry?
There definitely are companies and they shoot. I think I know that there's one company that I've worked with a couple of times last year. They've shot one or two, maybe three this year already, but I'm not sure about the others. We tend to have an industry break from sort of Christmas to the middle or maybe even late January sometimes. My theory is that because there's the break with Chinese New Year that happens later in February, I think that potentially there's been sort of an extended delay with some of the short dramas that we're going to be shooting here in Australia. This is just my own speculation, so I could be totally wrong. But yeah, no, it's been a bit of a quiet start to 2026. Hopefully, it'll pick up after Chinese New Year ends.
What's the difference of shooting, let's say, microdrama in Australia with a local scene or bilingual scene between shooting in China? Is any difference?
Pretty big difference. The Chinese teams will take their time a little bit more, and it's weird because they still manage to get it done, but we also have tighter labor laws than China does. So our working days are shorter before overtime kicks in. There's a lot more overtime that happens in China. And I think generally China has, in my experience, culture has a wonderful sense of aestheticism. So you know how to make things look good, basically. I could be wrong. I think there's a bit more of a budget for costumes. At least in my experience, I spent on my first production, which was Cinderella's Royal Secret, I spent about 6 hours shopping for my character's outfits. So we spent a few hours already trying on outfits. And then the director was really, really precise, the look that she wanted. We were just running all over Xi'an trying to find different suit shops to wear different clothes. And eventually we found it. And it was a little frustrating when it was happening because there wasn't a lot of feedback, but when she found the right ones, she knew what she was doing. Like I said, wonderful, wonderful, which I really appreciate.
Interesting. I thought those costumes were prepared. Like normally we have a stock of costumes you can
Mm.
choose.
That's an anomaly from what I've heard. I tried on lots and lots of outfits that were already there, pre-made and ready to go. Some of them didn't fit, some of them didn't look right, and eventually it was like, go out, find some. And so myself and my liaison and one of the costume teams, we just went out suit shopping for hours, which is a fond memory I have. I think maybe my first couple of days in China, maybe my second day in China.
Let's pause for a second. Imagine you're in a crowded marketplace. Vendors selling cakes, jewelry, all kinds of things. And you are one of the vendors trying to sell a story. What kind of story will you tell? And more importantly, how do you keep people stop listening and actually pay? That's the narrative logic of short drama. I explain this in my book, Short Drama Writing 101. Write what platforms want. It's available on Payhip, Amazon, and Google Playbooks. Now let's back to the video.
Oh, that was a very interesting experience. Yeah, the director may have her vision to her, right? Her vision of the
Yes,
clothes.
again, it was definitely an anomaly, and I haven't heard of that happening much. Yeah, I think I was just very lucky because I was with a team for that production, and everyone just cared about doing the best job. So, if that meant going out and spending a lot of time finding the right suits, it was worth it because I ended up looking great. So, thanks to the team that put it together.
What about your shooting experience in Australia? Do you have any like interesting moments you want to share?
I've talked ad nauseum about Vampire's Forbidden Kiss on other podcasts, so I'll briefly mention that. That was the most creatively fulfilling short drama experiences I've had. The character was well written, and they gave me a lot of creative license to do what I wanted with the character. I'll try and broaden my scope, so I'm giving you guys something different to talk about. I did a racing short drama. I was the secondary antagonist for, it was called Return of the Racing King, and I played Raven. They were the main villain, and I was his protege, basically. So it was great, actually, because I, funnily enough, the way the script was written, I got more time on screen and on set than the main villain. I got to, hop into some and cool race cars. I didn't drive them because that would have been very unsafe. But, I got to sit in them and I got to play around and be on the track and see all that going on. And they made that look fantastic. The one that I mentioned, My Husband is an American Hero, was quite an interesting experience because it was a script that takes place in real time. So it starts, I forget what time it actually started in the script, but then it just, from there, there's not cutting, it doesn't jump days or anything like that. It's just scene at the beginning where the main character's in a bus. She gets off the bus, she hops in a car with her father, I think, and then they carry on until they get to the funeral site. She gets out and the father drives away. And then when from the funeral site to the end of the script, that's all it is. And it just takes place all in real time. So that was very interesting in terms of shooting it, in terms of everybody getting their lines out, and in terms of seeing what it's like when you have time pressures and a lot being asked of your actors. You just have to look at the practicalities of it, and everyone did their with the material that they had and the time that they had to prepare it. A very clinical approach to it. You would do the master, you would set the stage and the action for the 10 pages we were shooting that day, and then you just the master, and after that you just go in and you get individual coverage based on minimizing the amount of changes to the lighting setups, and then based on making sure that the light is going to match where the sun was in terms of how the sun would travel over the set and change the light throughout the day. So it was incredible to see the mechanism of filmmaking happen in such a clinical way, and the way that the actors still manage to deliver a great job despite that.
Is it released in an app?
Yeah, that was released on Stardust, and I believe that that one was actually adapted from a very famous Chinese short drama. It's very funny because I had a friend who was telling me about this short drama that he was watching and explaining the plot. And I realized that he had watched the Chinese version. And I was like, dude, I was in the English version of that.
Have you watched the Chinese version?
I haven't. I've actually been meaning to check it out, but I keep forgetting to get the name of it. So I really should get the name of it just to see what the differences were like. It'd be quite interesting.
If a newcomer who is from other backgrounds, if he or she wants to tap into short drama industry, to perform on like in front of screen, so what's your suggestion on them?
I would be very wary about putting a newcomer in onto a short drama set. I think that it's a really good place to learn. Let's just say hypothetically for this example, they've done some acting training and maybe they've done a few short films, so they're not a complete beginner in terms of acting, but they've never done a short drama before, just to make this a little easier. Personally, I don't think it's the sort of place that I would put someone who's never acted before onto for the very first time, because it was really intense and it can be very demanding, and there's a lot of pressures that you wouldn't have on, say, a 2 or 3 day short film. I mean, that's just me. I started acting maybe more than 20 years ago now, so it's been a while. But for this example, I would say get onto them however you can. If you start as an extra, half of the time you might end up with a line or two, because a lot of the crowds act as sort of a Greek chorus. So for those of you who don't know, in Greek plays, which is where performance as an art form started, at least in terms of the West, you would have a chorus, and that would be a crowd that would echo the what's on. So you see that a lot in short dramas where you'll have a lot of background characters whispering or explaining some important plot details, or up with the main villain against the heroine, for example. So that'd be a great way to get yourself onto set and to see what the pace of it is like, to see what the lead actors are going through in terms of the pressures that they're put on, because they're not insignificant, especially the lead females. So the 99% of the dramas, the person with the most amount of work in terms of acting is the lead female. And so that can be incredibly taxing, especially if they're in every scene, which happens a lot. Yeah. And then make friends with everyone, make friends with the producers, make friends with the other actors, and try to get yourself onto more sets. And eventually you'll be asked to audition for things, because with these productions, because the turnaround is so tight, a lot of the time, if they know you and they like you, and you weren't a pain to be on set with, they'll ask you to audition again, and they'll ask you to audition for something more. And they'll go, oh, actually, it happened to me. So there was a company, and I had a 3 day role in a very successful short drama in Australia. I played a hitman in that, did a pretty good job according to the crew. And then later on, the production team went and formed their own production company and asked me to audition for a couple more of their roles. And those were the roles that ended up on Stardust. So yeah, it's a little weird. You don't have a lot of control as an actor, but if you're on time, know your lines, have an idea, and you're pleasant to be around, people will remember you.
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion. So first, if there's a newcomer, take some courses acting, and then maybe start with some actress and know the pacing. Because I heard that I've interviewed actors and casting directors. They kind of believe short drama is more like a little bit difficult than shooting a film because the
Mm.
schedule is so tense. You
Yeah.
only have 1 to 2 take. That's it.
So Vampire's Forbidden Kiss was one of those where the director was incredibly collaborative, and he had a background in film and TV. So we had a really great team that kept us on time, but the director was very adamant about making sure that the creative process wasn't sacrificed for the sake of schedule. I don't know how they did it. It was like a magic trick almost. But yes, for the majority of the time, 1 to 2 takes. You've got to nail it.
From your perspective, how are those short drama scripts evolving? Are they evolving? Or so in terms of themes, genres, or storytelling approaches?
Both yes and no. They're sort of evolving because the worlds are expanding, the genres are expanding as well. But for the most part, I mean, the quality is always improving, but a lot of the time it's very much these fantasy female-led stories, 90% of the time, let's say. And I think that is starting to be broken. But overall, I know that like people are attempting horror verticals and sci-fi verticals, but these are all rare, isolated examples. I think the industry knows where its market is and is catering to that, and it's working for it. I think that in terms of what they know what's working for them, they're pushing the boundaries there and exploring different stories and ideas. And but in terms of breaking out of that mold that I mentioned previously, the romance female led stories, it's still the majority of what's going on, which is fine if it's working and it's making money. There's, don't fix what isn't broken. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here because it's still such a new medium.
In China, actually start with male audience. So they find a niche market of like middle-aged men in the first place and gradually expand it to house cleaners, nannies, delivery guys, and then expand it to girls, female audience. That's the way in China. When they export it overseas, they find a blank market as well in romance stories and like CEO billionaire story, like vampire, those stories. What kind of story do you think guys will like to watch?
So we've already discussed that these are female-led stories and they heavily focus on romance, and that's because the market share is primarily driven by women. So that's the sort of fantasy that they're catering to, is this romance fantasy that does very well with women. Men, it's different. It's more of a competence fantasy. That's why James Bond has been so popular for so long. He's the ultimate competent man. And so showing a man in whatever field he's in. So different examples could be James Bond, Arnold Schwarzenegger in Predator is a hyper masculine 80s version of the competent male hero. I think that that's a very easy win that could potentially draw male viewers in. Yeah, action, competent men handling situations well with challenges. And so you ultimately grow and you're challenged throughout the story.
Yeah, you just mentioned you were perform in a car racing short drama.
Mm.
Is it still female oriented, female short drama?
Still had a romance at the center of its plot. And so they've been slightly more geared towards men, but given it had such a heavy romance element to it, it was definitely more of a 50-50 split, I think.
If you have to define short drama, how will you define it? And what is the essence or core of a micro drama?
I've been thinking about this a lot because when I see people talk about short dramas online, it's really interesting because the format and the genre sort of get conflated together. When you say short drama, you think about something that's my phone cover, it's filmed vertically like this for viewing on your phone. But then you also immediately think about what the genre is, and you think about heavily romanticized story about a female lead who encounters some. It's the Beauty and the Beast myth done in various different forms. So if you watch Disney's Beauty and the Beast, that's the how much it almost mirrors a storyline beat for beat, and that's because it's archetypal in its story. Yeah, anyway, what I was saying was that the two of them kind of get conflated together. So on the one hand, you have the genre, which I mentioned, but in terms of, I'm trying to separate it, in terms of what a short drama is, it's a mobile first viewing experience designed for short, quick viewing hits. So if you're on the train to work, you pull it up and you watch a couple of episodes, put it away when you get to work. You're on your break, you go back to it. You can binge it if you want to, but it's designed around convenience. And that's why it's not, I've seen people asking, why isn't it still just filmed like that? And it's because it's about convenience. So you pull it out, you watch your story, it doesn't waste time, it doesn't bandy about and try to be clever in terms of how it subverts the story and takes its time getting there. It just gets straight to the point. And when I've been interviewed on other podcasts by fans of vertical dramas, that's something that's come up when I've asked them what they like about it, is that they're very obvious about what they're about, and there's no mucking about. They're sort of simple dopamine hits. And I don't mean that as a derogatory term. It's just what they are.
Actually, AI is like AI motion comics. It's been very popular in China. It was a major hit last year, and I believe we are going to export it overseas as well very soon. So, as an actor yourself, how do you see AI?
There's be a big demand for it. From it cuts down costs and time to export things. In terms of myself as an actor, I try not to get caught up in hysteria around these things, which is very easy to do, because people will look at. So one of the most viral videos was the Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise video that the Bike Dance, Sea Dance video created. That went viral all around the world. I think, at least for the time being, there will still be a desire from people to watch stories created by humans. That doesn't mean that AI can't play an important role in all aspects of production. Maybe this is just my own optimism leaking through, but I think that you get into a sort of dilemma of, the sort of paradox of choice. If you have too many things, you can type a prompt and you get a full-length feature film. What prompt do I type? I can type in anything. And then people are like, oh, it's okay. The AI will be able to figure it out and create the perfect movie for you. And it's like, well, yes, but people also want to see other perspectives on the world and stories that they weren't aware of. You know, if the AI is constantly trying to please you, you're not going to get surprised by different stories out there. Did you ever see Sinners, the Ryan Coogler vampire film that came out beginning of last year? So it was a big hit, and it's set in the 1920s Prohibition era in the deep South of America, and it's about these two twin brothers played by Michael B. Jordan. And it's a little bit reminiscent of From Dusk Till Dawn, an older Robert Rodriguez, Quentin Tarantino film, and it's got a brilliant score that's augmented by an Irish band. So there's so many unique aspects to it that AI might be able to create something like that, but the likelihood of it trying to zero in on your interests and create something as far left of field as that is quite low, even as it gets smarter and smarter. I think that there will be a human component to it, because AI doesn't need to tell stories to itself. Humans tell stories, because at the end of the day, that's how we make sense of the world. That's how society evolved, is we had religion first before we had written language, and religion was a tool that was you were able to pass down the morals and ethics of a society, and we used that in stories because we were able to enact a version of the world that we would like to come to pass. So it's deeply ingrained in us. So I got a bit all over the place and esoteric for you there. But I think that in terms of AI, it will definitely come to be a useful aspect in terms of all areas of production. I'm skeptical about whether it will completely replace filming and actors and human storytelling, but I guess we'll see. If you think about 2023, if you ever saw the Will Smith video of him eating spaghetti, and it was horrific, it was nightmare fuel, to today with Bike Dance and that Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt video of them fighting on a skyscraper, it was almost there. I can look at it and I can see that it's AI, but it's almost indistinguishable. There was a really good video of Jackie Chan and Jet Li, both in their prime, fighting. And aside from one or two angles where like an arm disappeared for a moment or whatnot during a particularly flashy move, most of the time indistinguishable, and it managed to capture the nuances of the different ways that they fought as well. So it's very impressive.
We'll see, because here in China, we kind of believe we'll replace a lot of the we call low quality short dramas produced in China. Of course, the scripts are written by humans. What do you think the future of short dramas
I
are?
think the immediate future is growth. It seems like they're becoming a much bigger thing in terms of the world, in terms of where they're shooting, which is great because it means more opportunities for actors in an industry that's already contracting and shrinking elsewhere. Traditional film and TV, it's getting harder and harder to break into. This provides an avenue for people to go and work and get paid and travel and meet new people. So yeah, I think and I hope growth.
You are definitely well, because in China, it's a huge business.
I actually saw my mother sent me an article from a paper in Sydney called the Sydney Morning Herald, and it was talking about how there were a lot of people in China who had degrees in other industries that weren't able to get hired and were getting hired in the vertical filmmaking ecosystem. So yeah, it definitely seems booming in China. Hopefully, it'll boom elsewhere in the world, like in Australia.
Yeah, I think it definitely will. It's doubled the annual box office of 2025. So in 2024, you only surpassed the annual box office.
You know what I would be interested to see? I don't have the metrics on me right now. Is the comparison between the short drama industry and the video game industry? Because I know that the video game industry is currently beating film, TV, and sports, at least in the West. I would assume it's Asia as well. But yeah, it would be interesting to see what the comparisons are between the two there, because yeah, that's a huge market as well.
Never thought that way. But the thing is, I thought like games is always big industry.
So like 2019 backwards, film and TV was still doing really well. Ever since COVID happened, the video game industry just shot up like that, and it hasn't gone back down. It's just grown and grown and grown.
I think it's
Yeah,
interesting you brought this out.
it's just another way for people to grapple with and experience stories. Um, so, if we're talking about AI and storytelling in general, a big thing that will happen eventually is completely immersive worlds that you'll be able to dive into from video games that are customized to your experience. So, for now, video games, it's sort of, even if it's a big open world, there are still a limited amount of actions that you can take, interactions you can take in side quests and whatnot. And eventually, I think the goal is to have AI generate the missions and the in real time and customize it to you and your experience, your preferred difficulty level, so nobody will get the same version of a video game that they're playing. They're already experimenting with it a little bit.
And
Yeah.
also for games, it gives you constant dopamine hit.
Yeah, it's interesting. They operate on different mechanisms because that's the sort of they're a little bit closer to social media in the intermittent reward thing. It's a little bit closer to that. Whereas with video games, a large portion of the time, it's keeping you invested by just enough challenge without it being too difficult that you throw the video game out. But yeah, in terms of a broader look, it's very similar.
Why do you think like game is booming or microdrama is booming after the pandemic?
There was a huge isolation aspect for the majority of people. So a lot of people were stuck inside with nothing to do. I know I played a lot of games in my backlog during the lockdowns in Australia, and many other people did as well, because you didn't have much else to do. Same with the short dramas. It was you couldn't go to the cinemas. TV was still doing really well, but a lot of people were watching comfort series. So they were watching things they'd already seen again on TV. For example, in 2020, the most watched show on Netflix was The Office, the US version with Steve Carell. And that's quite an old sitcom, but it was so popular, people would just have it on in the background because it was a familiar, comforting thing for them. And then we got so used to being by ourselves, not going out, that it's been harder to convince people to re-engage in that communal way before. It's interesting now because there's actually a large spike in younger people attending religion in the West, because I think people are craving that communal experience, um, which has been sort of disturbed by COVID.
I actually interviewed our short drama critic. She mentioned a very interesting point. She mentioned she wants secure from watching those short dramas. So maybe that's the reason, The Office was rewatched.
It's like I said, comfort watching. You're not going. I could give you some examples, but I'm not sure whether you would have seen them, like Deliverance or Cape Fear or Revolutionary Road. These movies that are hard to watch. They're famous because you may only watch them once because they're brilliant, but they're so intense that you're like, I don't need to see that again. Versus something like The Office, which you can just constantly rewatch because it's such a source of comfort and joy.
Did you did you invent or it's a phrase that people were saying?
I'm I don't know. It just sort of came to my mind then. It reminded me of comfort food, where people have their food that sort of like them feel warm, safe, and comfortable. It's like that. If I did, then everyone's welcome
Yeah,
to use it.
I like your phrase. I think that's one of the core of short drama is